Hey guys, welcome back to Alleviated Soul. So today we are continuing with the part 5 of the chapter King Anga, Vena and Prthu Mahārāja, Canto 4. My dear citizens, you should enthusiastically render devotional service unto the Supreme Lord by engaging your minds, your words, your bodies, as well as the results of your occupational duties. You should know that the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes especially pleased with those devotees who follow in His footsteps by engaging in the service of the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas without reservation, for they are always dear to Him, just as He is dear to them. Although the Supreme Lord certainly eats those offerings that are made into the sacrificial fire, He takes more pleasure in accepting the offerings made through the mouths of the Brahmanas and pure devotees. O respectable persons present here, I beg to receive your blessings so that I may perpetually carry upon my crown the dust from the lotus feet of such Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. Whoever does so acquires the qualities of those pure Brahmanas, whose only wealth is their good behavior, and thus he receives all kinds of opulence without difficulty. After hearing Mahārāja Prthu's excellent speech, the members of the assembly heartily congratulated him as follows. My dear king, the Vedic conclusion that one can conquer heaven as the result of the activities of a good son has been practically demonstrated by you. The most sinful king Vena has been delivered from the darkest regions of hell by you. His son, just as Hiranyakashipu had formerly been rescued by his son Prahlada. O dear king, since you are preaching the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we feel ourselves to be very fortunate as if we are living directly under His merciful protection. Today, you have opened our eyes and revealed the means for crossing to the other side of the ocean of darkness in which we are immersed. As the citizens were offering their prayers in glorification of King Prthu, the 4 Kumaras arrived there and they appeared as effulgent as the sun. Being very anxious to welcome the great sages, King Prthu immediately stood up with folded hands along with his ministers. After being worshipped with great respect, the 4 Kumaras took their seats upon a golden throne, and thus they appeared just like a blazing fire on an altar of sacrifice. After bowing down and washing the sages' feet, Mahārāja Prthu took the water and sprinkled it over his head just to show how one should receive a spiritually advanced personality. Then, while displaying great gentleness and humility, King Prthu said, My dear great sages, it is very difficult for even mystic yogis to see you, and so I do not know what kind of pious activity I had previously performed, so that now you are gracing me by your presence. For one who pleases great Brahmanas and Vaishnavas like you, there is no difficulty in achieving anything in this world or after death, for he automatically becomes favored by the Supreme Lord. My dear sages, please describe to me how persons who are entangled in the dangerous condition of material existence and thus whose only aim in life is sense gratification can become blessed with good fortune. I am convinced that personalities such as you are the only friends of those who are suffering in the blazing fire of material existence, and so I have inquired from you how they can very soon achieve life's ultimate goal. After hearing Mahāraja Prthu's speech, which was meaningful and appropriate, Sanat Kumara smiled with satisfaction and replied, "My dear king, I have been very nicely questioned by you, for you are inquiring about the welfare of all living beings. In spite of already knowing everything, you are asking these questions because that is the natural behavior of saintly persons. My dear Prthu Mahāraja, it has been conclusively decided in Shastra after due consideration that the ultimate welfare of human society is to gain detachment from the bodily concept of life and to increase attachment for the Supreme Lord, who is beyond the influence of the modes of material nature. This attachment for the Supreme is attained by the execution of Bhakti Yoga, beginning with hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should mold his life in such a way that he cannot live in peace for a moment without drinking the nectar of the glorification of the Lord. Only in this way can one lose his long cherished taste for material sense gratification. Such a devotee should lead a very simple life, and while carefully following the regulative principles, he should not blaspheme others. One should not associate with persons who are simply interested in making money and enjoying sense gratification. For when one's mind and senses become attracted to sense objects for the purpose of enjoyment, the mind becomes very agitated. As a result, one's real consciousness becomes covered and lost, just like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the tall grass on its banks. There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking that other subject matters are more pleasing than self-realization. When one becomes completely devoid of spiritual knowledge, he gradually sinks down to the level of trees and stones. Therefore, my dear king, please try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living in the heart of everyone's body along with the individual soul, for it is unto him alone that one must surrender." After thus being enlightened by Sanat Kumara, the son of Lord Brahma, King Prthu, said, "O Brahmana, Lord Vishnu had formally indicated that I would be favored by your appearance, and so to confirm this blessing, you have come here. Because it is my duty to offer you something, I hereby place my life, family members, palace, possessions, and indeed my entire kingdom and treasury at your disposal, although I hesitate to do so because these things are the remnants left by others. I had received all my opulence by the mercy of the Brahmanas, and thus it is they who are actually the proprietors. We, the other three classes, simply accept whatever they leave for us as remnants. Great personalities such as yourselves cannot be properly repaid for their words of enlightenment, and thus I request you to be satisfied with your own exalted activities." The four Kumaras were very satisfied with Mahāraja Prthu's reception, and so with great pleasure they ascended into the sky to praise his character within everyone's hearing. After the departure of the Kumaras, Mahāraja Prthu continued to rule his kingdom, his only aim being to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. King Prthu begot 5 sons by his wife Arsi, named Vijitasshva, Dhumrakesha, Haryaksha, Dravina and Vraka. Mahāraja Prthu was as strong as Indra, the king of heaven, and at the same time he was as tolerant as the earth. Just as rainfall satisfies everyone's desires, Mahāraja Prthu distributed his mercy to all, and while engaged in executing some philanthropic work, he endeavored just as if he were working for his own self. He was like the sea in that no one could understand his depths, and like Mount Meru, he was fixed in his purpose. Mahāraja Prathu's opulence was compared with the Himalayan mountains, where all kinds of valuable metals and jewels are stocked. Like the wind, his influence was felt everywhere. In terms of bodily beauty, he was just like Cupid. In thoughtfulness, he was like a lion, and in terms of self-control, he seemed to rival the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mahāraja Prathu's reputation was loudly declared throughout the entire universe, and the ladies and devotees who heard of him found his character and activities to be as pleasing as Lord Ramachandra's. Finally, when Mahāraja Prthu saw that he was getting old, he divided his wealth by giving pensions to all kinds of living entities, and then he handed over the rule of the earth to his sons. While surrounded by the citizens who were shedding tears of grief due to impending separation, King Prthu departed from his palace and proceeded to the forest along with his wife to perform austerities. While living in the forest, King Prthu sometimes ate the roots of trees and sometimes he ate fruit and dry leaves. Sometimes for weeks together he would only drink water, and at last he subsisted by simply breathing air. During the summer, Mahāraja Prthu sat under the hot sun while keeping himself surrounded on all four sides with blazing fires. During the rainy season, he exposed himself to the harsh weather, and in the winter he entered the river and stood with water up to his neck. The king would lie down on the bare floor at night. He completely refrained from discharging semen, and he performed many other austerities meant for controlling the senses and life air. Because it was Satya Yuga, Mahāraja Prthu practiced Astanga Yoga as a means of performing devotional service, and as a result, he developed unflinching love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By constantly thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord, King Prthu became completely detached from the material conception of life and thus was released from the clutches of false ego. At that time, he could directly see the Lord as Paramatma seated within his heart. Due to having attained the perfect platform of being able to receive instructions directly from the Supreme Lord, King Prthu gave up the mechanical practice of yoga. Finally, desiring to give up his body without waiting for a natural death, Mahāraja Prthu sat down in a particular yoga posture whereby he blocked his anus with his ankles. By utilizing the knowledge of yoga that he had formerly acquired, the king gradually raised his life air to the navel, then the heart, the throat, and then a position between the eyebrows. From there, Mahāraja Prthu raised his life air to the skull's Brahma Randhra, at which time he began amalgamating the various elements within his body into the totality of these elements. This is accomplished by meditating inversely upon the creative process step by step up to the point of amalgamating the false ego with the Mahat Tattva. By this method, Prthu Mahārāja gave up his material body and then mounted the chariot and had come before him to take him back to Vaikuntha. Queen Ursi had followed her husband in his life of austerity, although her body was very delicate. She was not at all accustomed to the hardships of forest life, and so because of lying on the bare ground and eating only fruits, flowers and leaves, she became very lean and weak. Still, because of the pleasure that she derived from serving her husband, she did not feel even the slightest difficulty. When Queen Ursi could perceive that her husband's body no longer showed any sign of life, she lamented for only a little while, for she was a great wife of an exalted personality. Without further ado, she built a funeral pyre on top of a hill and then placed her husband's body upon it so that it could be consumed in the blazing fire. Thereafter, Queen Ursi executed all of the necessary religious rituals, and while bathing in the river, she offered oblations of water as was customary. Finally, after offering her obeisances unto the demigods, Queen Ursi circumambulated King Prthu's body and then entered the fire while thinking of her husband's lotus feet. After observing this brave act, thousands of demigods and their wives who were seated on top of Mount Mandara showered flowers upon the funeral pyre as a token of honor. With great satisfaction, the wives of the demigods glorified Queen Ursi by talking amongst themselves as follows: "All glories to the wife of King Prthu, for she always served Lord Vishnu. Just see how the chastity Queen Ursi is still following her husband upwards as far as we can see. Although the lifespan of human beings is very short, they can easily go back to Godhead by engaging in the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, anyone who has attained the rare human birth and yet misuses the opportunity by laboring hard, by performing fruitive activities, must be considered as cheated and envious of his own self." While the wives of the demigods were talking among themselves in this way, the airplane containing Queen Ursi reached the Vaikuntha planet that her husband had attained. Maitreya concludes this narration by declaring, "Anyone who reads, hears, or describes the wonderful characteristics of Mahārāja Prthu with faith and determination will also go to Vaikuntha. Anyone who hears this narration with great respect will become the father of many children if he is without any, and the richest of men even if he has no money. Whoever hears this narration 3 times will become very reputed within society, and even if he is illiterate, he will become a great scholar." In other words, hearing about Mahārāja Prthu is so auspicious that it drives away all kinds of bad luck. Even if a pure devotee is situated in the transcendental position due to being completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is his duty to hear and induce others to hear about the character and life of King Prthu. Whoever regularly reads this great history will certainly increase his faith and attraction for the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, which are the boat whereby one can cross over the ocean of nescience. With this, we complete this chapter. Radhe Radhe.